Minnesota Lynx are a very good team. And I'm saying people because they feel it too. I was at the Commissioner's Cup and I talked to a number of Lynx players. I talked to their head coach Cheryl Reeve, and it's a common theme with them. They were overlooked. They don't feel, they have been respected in the right way. We saw the post game comments from Cheryl Reeve, right? Like it's like didn't
We
help that
gotta
they went on
acknowledge
to
this
lose
now.
their first game right after, but we're gonna allow for a little letdown. They were coming off of a big win, but they look good. And Callie, you knew my take. I said they're the second best team in the league. I thought they were going to win the Commissioner's Cup. And, it was interesting because I spoke with Brianna Stewart before the game, and she talks about their first matchup with the Lynx. And she said they didn't play like themselves, the Liberty, and that the Lynx controlled their first matchup from start to end. And that is a correct assessment. But the Lynx controlled the Commissioner's Cup the entire second half, right? Like, it was a really good game and it was close, but the closest I feel like once the Lynx took the lead in that second half they got was when Brianna Stewart went on like a 9-0 run herself to bring them back within one. And then the Lynx just did what they keep doing. They show their acumen. They great defense. Courtney, you can always rely on her mid-range shot, right? They're just so steady. And they have so many good players.
Yeah.
And Elena Smith, she said that she thinks like they don't have maybe like the flashy names and that's why people overlook them. So that
Yeah.
was her take. But this is a team that people have overlooked. But the Lynx, they are legit. They are
Yeah.
legit, Callie, and we
Yeah.
have to start taking them seriously. So I don't want to just say like, oh, the sky gave them that game. I think they came and they snatched it and they took it because they're that good of a team. Right. And they have to prove it. They have to get somewhere. But I think they've been showing us all season that they belong in the same conversations with the defending champs, with the
Absolutely.
Connecticut Sun, with the New York Liberty. I mean, the Sun are also a little disrespected, but I'm just saying they belong in these conversations with those other teams, and we don't have to keep qualifying it to talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the lack of flashy names, and I kind of like hate that sentiment because like that's probably true generally, but like how do we get to the point where Napheesa is like people need to understand, like she is not to be played with. I mean, you think just even the last week, including the Commissioner's Cup final, 21 points. This is the average, 9.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, and 3 steals. Like that's such a complete average over a week. Like she's impacting the game on so many different levels. I mean, her fans have the
It's an
nickname
MVP
for
level
her.
season. We're
Right. I
not
was gonna
talking
say,
about it because of Asia Wilson, but it's an MVP level season.
yeah, I mean, that's what I was just about to say. Like her fans have that nickname for her. They call her the MVP. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what the point that I was gonna get to is that she's in that same company as Asia. It's just that Asia is so far ahead, it feels. But like they are really it's the same caliber of player. And so I think that like yes, Asia is in a class of her own, but I do hope we can get to the point where Napheesa is like a flashy name that people recognize. I feel like she has all the star power, like she's a mom, she's all these things. She used to have a podcast with Asia where she really like showed
Yeah.
her personality. So I
Starting
don't
her
know.
own league with Brianna.
Exactly. Like so that's something that I really hope will change is like let's get her some name recognition. She's a flashy name too.
Yeah. And the thing is, what's interesting is that they have so many players. Like Carlton could have been the MVP of the Commissioner's Cup. There were some who were surprised that she didn't win it. So it's not just Napheesa. And I think you pointed that out last week. This is
Mhm.
why I think they're such a threat because they're so well rounded. They're so well rounded and their defense is the top defense, right? So these are things that are going to get them very far. I still think they're the second best team in the league. I don't care that they lost, right after the Commissioner's Cup. I do. I think the Minnesota Lynx are so, so very good.
I
So
mean, you can check a lot of power rankings today. They're the top team on a lot of those, the number one team. So,
yes. They're not on mine, but that's because I didn't issue some today. I did them, on Friday or over the weekend. And it wasn't based on, I still would have them second, so that's not changing for me, but they to me are second, even though the Liberty do have the best record in the WNBA, and that shouldn't be overlooked. I have, in my most recent rankings, I have the Liberty third, I have the Minnesota Lynx second, and I have the Aces first, and I think the Aces, people were like, oh, you got to give them more time when I first put them back at number one and blah, blah, blah.
And
Okay,
now
well,
look.
Callie, they're now 4-0
Yeah.
since Chelsea Gray's return.
You know what else that was since, though? That was also since A'ja Wilson broke down in tears following their 6th loss, talking about how badly she wants to inspire her teammates. So I think we've heard Becky Hammon say that the Aces, they've always had a rough patch under her leadership at some point in the season. Like, it's never going to be all gravy. It's just come at different times. And I think that 6-6 start was born through a lot of adversity. They had 6 players, aftermath of an incredibly demanding championship run, absence of Chelsea Gray. But I think that A'ja Wilson moment was pivotal. Chelsea Gray came back, and the team has not lost since. And I feel like it's hard to imagine that there's anything else that could stop the Aces from this point. And I'm not being hyperbolic. Like, I'm watching the team, and I'm like, who is going to stop them?
Right. I mean, listen, in her 4 games back, Chelsea Gray, they're 4-0. They've outscored opponents by 51 points in the 86 minutes that she's played. She hasn't even started in all those games. She's only started in 2 of them. And the game against the Mystics was her best game back so far this season, right? And I say that because I think, listen, with Jackie Young is also like huge. So I don't want to like undersell who she is. And she was taking a lot of the Chelsea Gray role while Chelsea was out. But I think it's important that like they did that on an off night from A'ja. Her 20-point game streak broke over the weekend. She was held scoreless in the half, which is like not something I think that's been done to her in a long time.
It's never been done to her ever.
Okay. So the point is that they won a game like that with A'ja Wilson playing the way she did. And I understand that people might say, oh, it's the Mystics, but the Mystics have challenged every team this season, right? The Mystics are not as bad as their record would say. They're missing some very key players, and they're just not able to close games most of the times, right? Where these other teams have the ability to do that. So my point is that, to me, the fact that the Aces were able to do that in spite of A'ja's game just tells me that, I still think they're the best team. And also, in the time since Chelsea Gray has returned, because I feel like this goes overlooked, their defense has also been much better. And that was like the glaring thing, because they've actually been like a top 2 offense most of the season. It's their defense that has been really bad. And I'm sure you've heard Becky Hammon complain about their defense. And so all around, everyone had to play better defense. But I just think people really overlooked what Chelsea brought to the team from a defensive standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chelsea and Jackie were both crucial to that 4th quarter against the Mystics. That team only scored 8 points. 8 points in the 4th quarter because of their defense. I do kind of want to push back on something that you said, though, about A'ja having an off night. Like, yes, shots were not falling for A'ja, and that's part of it. But I also do think that it was a huge part of the Mystics, like their game plan to take
I agree.
A'ja out,
what are you pushing back on?
Chelsea out. I'm saying, like, it's not like, oh, they just happened to like have this great performance with A'ja having an off night. No, I think that because the Mystics game plan focused so much on A'ja and Kelsey, it created opportunities for focus on A'ja and Kelsey. It created opportunities. So I don't think it's like, oh, she had an off night and like this just happened to happen. But I do think
that's not what I was saying. I'm just saying the fact that she had an off night, that was the result. Yeah. Why it happened was not my point. My point is that when Chelsea Gray was not there before, their ability to be as flexible and to do other things, it really depended on A'ja having big performances on a nightly basis. And they still need her to be the star of the team, but they could weather an off night from her whether it's just her having off night, whether it's a team holding her to that, whether it's the game plan, they were able to weather that because they have a Chelsea Gray, they have a
Right.
Jackie Young that is no longer sick, right? So even
Right.
if Kelsey was also contained because of their game plan, they still had the others to do that. And they didn't have that earlier this season because they were missing a key piece in in Chelsea. And then obviously there were games that, well, Jackie missed one game, but also she was like sick and under the weather and playing out of position. So now you have everybody return to their natural position and all of that. So that's the versatility and their ability to have scoring threats from so many different options. That's part of what makes the Aces who they were. And they were missing some of that before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, I mean, the Aces are there still. The Lynx are there. Obviously, the Liberty are there. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not spending a lot of time to talk about the Liberty, but the Liberty are a top team. I don't think anyone disputes that. They right now have the best record in the league. It's good for them that things like the Commissioner's Cup does not affect the standings because it keeps them in first place, but it does affect how we can evaluate the teams. I remember last year after the Liberty went into Vegas and won the Commissioner's Cup, it didn't count in the standings, but people were like, Vegas may be in trouble, right? So the same way that was done, we're allowed to evaluate the Commissioner's Cup and say, look, the Lynx have now beaten the Liberty twice this year, right?
Yeah.
They're up there and we need to acknowledge that, but the Liberty are still a very, very formidable team and they will be there. They will be there at the end, in the Final Four, I'm sure. But they're right now, like I said, they are first in the standings. They're not at the top of my rankings, but they are in the contender tier. They're one of the top teams. The Sun have slid a little. They lost like three. They lost 3 out of 4 games in their last 4. Like they haven't been playing that well.
5-4 since their 9-0 start.
Yeah.
Like what is going on with them? What is going on?
I don't think there's something going on with them though. I think it's who they've been. You
think they were frauds? They were on fraud alert in their 9-0 start?
Not what I'm saying. That's how rumors get started. See, that's how rumors get started.
I'm trying to spice it up.
I think that their offense has always been a problem. And if you were watching the games, we've seen that. And so many of their wins were 1-point wins, close margins of victory. And so, yeah, their defense is what has carried them. And defense will carry you very far. But at some point, you got to score the ball. The offense has to go. And really, Tawana Bonner is their best offensive player. So, obviously, it depends. Scorer. Let me say that. She's their best scorer because obviously we understand what Alyssa Thomas brings. And she facilitates a lot of offense with her passing. We know that. But they struggle offensively. And so I think you're just seeing that play out now. So that's what I mean by this is who they've always been.
It's just Natalie thinks that the Connecticut Sun were frauds when they were 9-0 because their offense was I'm just messing with you. But okay, so one thing, they are 14-4 now. You talked about the Liberty having the best record. One thing that I'm looking out for is now the Aces, I'm looking for their record to improve because they did have that 6-6 start, but they just had a 4-0 run, like you mentioned. The next 8 games, they only play one team with a winning record. So that tells me their record better get a major boost and we better see some movement in those rankings. I know your rankings are kind of an anomaly, but in general.
And I'd like you to know that another reporter came up to me at the Mystics game and was like, Natalie, Nafluential? And I was like, yes. And he was just like, I agree with your rankings. I don't know why people
I'm not hating on your rankings.
No, I'm not saying you are, but I just want the people to know that because this is what I said about most people believing this behind the scenes, but just not putting it on wax. I'm okay putting it on wax.
Listen, you go be a trendsetter.
I'm not trying to set trends. I'm just being me. I don't do things for how people react. I do it because it's the reality. The Aces are the best team in the league. I don't see a team better than them. I think there's lots of other great teams. And that doesn't mean I think the Aces are unbeatable. That's not what I'm saying. But I think of the teams, they are the best. And right now they're on a 4-0 win streak. And I think that's enough to justify my rankings, especially when in 2 of those 4 wins, it was against 2 of the better teams in the league. So, I'm sorry. They are 2-time champions. they get that respect, and that's normal, right? When and I say that's normal, meaning when the Chiefs are struggling all season, no one counts them out, right? They're like, this is Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs, because of what they've done. When the Warriors were dynastying and doing their thing, people were like, okay, yeah, but whatever, it's the Warriors, right? So I'm not saying that the Aces are a dynasty yet, but they've achieved a certain level of, they've already shown us. So when people tell me they have to prove what? Someone said that to me. I was like, the Aces have to prove themselves? I don't think it's the Aces that have to prove themselves.
Yeah,
I think it's the other teams who've yet to beat them in a series that have to prove themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Listen, I was trying to give kudos to your rankings. I was saying hopefully with the Aces record, ideally on the upswing, the rest of these power rankings should shift. They should change, is what I'm.
I mean, you need the other teams to drop games too, right? And so the Suns started to do that. And I don't, the Storm don't seem to win at quite the same rate. So, you're looking at the Lynx and you're looking at the Liberty, but it's very rare. Like, those two teams aren't just going to likely go on a losing streak. So it's going to be a sporadic loss here, a sporadic loss there. But even against the Dream, they looked a little shaky. And this is what I've said about the Liberty, like, and one of the reasons why I said, like, for the most part, when the Aces, beat teams, they're doing it decisively. Like, it's not like, there might be like, it's a little tight in the beginning, but even with the Mystics, that ended up being a double-digit win. Like, there just becomes a point where they go to another gear. It's like they say, okay, it's time for us to do what we do as two-time champions, and it just kicks in. And like, the other teams are just not prepared for it. They can't match it. I haven't seen it yet. And that, to me, is what sets them apart. It's usually what sets apart championship teams.
Yeah. I mean, one note there, all 4 of their last games have been double-digit wins, which is crazy. That's crazy.
Like, what are we doing here? People are overthinking this, but people know where I stand. So things are up in the WNBA. We have great teams at the top. The middle is battling, so it's going to be fun.
Shout out to Julie Lloyd, battling with one eye on the court.
She's incredible.
That's all I had to say. You said battling. I had to let that out.
She's incredible. So it's going to be a fun. We're getting to that. You mentioned the Fever already at that midway point, but we're getting to that midway point. So I think we're getting a really good sense of who teams are.
Yeah.
In the league, and it's a great WNBA season. So tap in, y'all. It's good.